Good day, sir. I'm Pauljan J. Tambilawan, and I'm from 2B, 10 to 11 a.m. scan. And I will be discussing the CMO 3-2022, specifically the sections 2, administrative provisions, specific documents, some of the specific documents in sections 10, 11, and 12, and its purposes. Section 18, suspension and closure of CBW. And lastly, the penalties, violations, and compliance. So first, I will discuss the general considerations in the section 2. 2.1.1 is the transfers of goods to the CBWs. All goods intended to the CBWs must undergo into a mandatory non-intrusive inspection at port of discharge. When we say non-intrusive inspection, it means that the goods will be scanned or checked using technologies like X-ray machines. This applies whether the goods are declared under the Goods Declaration for Warehousing or the Goods Declaration for Transit. Then after this initial scan, the goods are generally allowed to be transferred immediately to the CBW. However, there are exemptions. If an alert order is issued and if the goods are chosen for a physical or additional non-intrusive examination, then the person or the officer that shall allow the immediate transfer of bonded goods into the CBW is the district collector, where he or she shall have an immediate transfer of the bonded goods into the CBW, where 100% physical examination shall be conducted. So that's for the transfers of goods to the CBWs. So let's move on to the storage period of bonded goods. So the goods entered into in the warehouse shall remain up to 1 year from the date that they arrive at the warehouse. And then the storage period is counted from the time of the goods arrive at the mother warehouse, not the sub warehouse, but the main warehouse. For perishable goods, they have limited shelf life that they can only stay in a CBW for 3 months from the date they arrive. However, law allows an extension of another 3 months, but only if there is a valid reason. And the warehouse operator submits a written request to the customs. So that's for the storage period of bonded goods. Let's move on to the allowable importations. Importations are strictly limited to what is written in the warehouse's authority or license, which is issued by the customs. Now, so first, the specific raw materials according to their corresponding HS tariff lines. Only the specific raw materials listed in the license identified by their HS tariff lines are allowed. Second, the volume of these raw materials must follow the approved in the license. The license will specify the unit of measure such as square meters, kilograms, or liters. Let's say, for example, in this is the situation, if the CBW is approved to import 50,000 kilograms of sugar, it should only be 50,000 kilograms of sugar, it should not exceed it, no? It should not exceed from the 50,000 kilograms of sugar. Bringing in 60,000 kilograms of sugar would exceed its license and be subject to duties and taxes. It is not duty and tax free if it exceeded the license. What is in the license? So the third, the letter C, is for the ICBWs. There are limits in the ICBWs. First, the raw materials can only be transferred or sold to the approved client and users. Also identified by the HS tariff codes. The license also specifies the exact quantity or volume per client. So, oh, all in all, in this subsection, the allowable importation, the CBW must strictly follow what is in their license. If the CBW imports goods not covered in its license or imports more than the approved volume, those goods will not be tax free or duty free. Instead, they will subject to duties and taxes like any other regular importations. So that's how this subsection wants us to know. For the non-importation of finished goods, it makes it makes it clear that the finished goods cannot be imported into a CBW for warehousing. No? Let's say, for example, importing ready-made shoes just to store in the CBW. It is not allowed. Why? Because CBWs are for raw materials and not for stocking finished products. No, it is a ready-made product is not a raw materials. No, the finished goods are only allowed if they will be used as inputs in making other products for exports with proper approval. So the thing that is allowed in this in the to store in the CBW is uh, importing shoe soles. If they will be combined with other materials in the CBW to produce new shoes, raw materials na siya, to produce new shoes for in export, and only if approved by the CBWC or the Customs Bonded Warehouse Committee. So that's for the non-importation of finished goods. So let's move on to the restricted and regulated goods. For the restricted and regulated goods, when we say restricted goods, they are the firearms, explosives, dangerous drugs. When we say regulated goods, so for example, importing medicines that needs approval for the FDA, importing rice that require clearance from the Department of Agriculture. So in this subsection, uh, it shows to us that the restricted and regulated goods need proper permits, and without the proper permits, customs can confiscate them. So withdrawals for local sales or domestic consumption. In this subsection, the goods in the CBWs are mainly for export, but limited amounts. These limited amounts is 30% may be sold locally with approval tax payment. Now, uh, the only uh, the only thing that is exempted from this 30% is the public customs bonded the private customs bonded warehouse. Why? Because they are operated by private companies for their own exclusive use, so that they are given more of flexibility. So that's why it is um, exempted, the private customs bonded warehouses in the withdrawals for local sales slash domestic consumption. For the withdrawal of subcontracting, uh, in this section, it is intended to have the MCBWs that lack sufficient equipment, space, or time to meet export commitments. To ensure proper control, the withdrawal of subcontracting goods require proper approval to the district collector, which must strictly follow the prescribed customs guidelines. So letter A, only accredited subcontractors. The CBW can only send goods to the subcontractors that are officially accredited and recognized by the customs. B, the work must be specified. The subcontracting job should be clearly defined whenever possible. Let's say, for example, if a subcontractor is only tasked with sewing garments, then only that part of work should be done outside and not the whole process. Letter C, for the garment manufacturing industry. Subcontracting has additional regulations because garments are highly monitored for export. The transfer for materials must be approved by the proper government agency like DTI, or BOI. Then only the pre-cut or cut-to-pattern materials may be transferred. Why the pre-cut or cut-to-pattern materials may be transferred? Because this prevents raw rolls of fabric from being sold illegally from local market. Then any deviation requires explicit approval from the government agency concerned. And letter D, uh, upon the completion of the processing done by the subcontractors, finished materials and the resulting wastages, if any, shall be returned to the CBW or CCBW accredited member, which shall be examined by the assigned warehouseman to account for duty and or tax-free raw materials used in processing. This means that after the subcontracting, the subcontractor must return the finished materials, the processed materials, and the resulting wastages now to the CBW. So the prohibitions on importations by the industry-specific customs bonded warehouses. The ICBWs are not allowed to import fibers, fabrics, and accessories, which is intended for garment manufacturing. Why? Because these materials would lead to leakages into the domestic market without proper duties and taxes being paid. So that's why. So let's move on to the 2.2, section 2.2, the provisions specific to common customs bonded warehouse,